In some of the videos on my channel, people have seen me use the LabRadar with Rimfire without the external microphone, and people are wondering how I get it to work with Rimfire. And basically, I have a general way of setting it all up. So the first off is positioning. You want to set up the LabRadar actually in front of the muzzle. This is counterintuitive to the way that the LabRadar is supposed to function. You're supposed to have it either like next to it or even behind it. But in order for this to work without the external microphone, I set the LabRadar in front. So that's a disclaimer, is that this is not ideal because you could theoretically shoot your LabRadar and you don't want to do that. But in order for the LabRadar to detect the muzzle blast, putting it slightly in front of the LabRadar allows that to detect better with the rimfire rounds. So that's the first thing I do. And obviously you're going to be offset, but I try to offset. I think the LabRadar has a 6-inch offset as a minimum on its settings when you define it, but physically I have it offset by as little as 3 to 4 inches. That's all depending on how comfortable you are with how you want to set this all up. As long as you have a stable rest and your gun is going to jump around when you're shooting. I mean, it shouldn't jump around when you're shooting rimfire, but you never know. Some people, inexperienced shooters, may move constantly between shots. So you'll have to be aware of how that muzzle offset is to the LabRadar. But I generally stick about 3 inches offset, again, to make sure that the muzzle blast is detected by the LabRadar. After we have that all set up, we generally go into the LabRadar to adjust the actual settings. But let me go ahead and move the camera around so you can get an idea of what the offset looks like with the physical setup of the LabRadar with respect to the rifle. Here's a view behind the gun to show you how the rifle is offset from the LabRadar. About 3 inches offset, and we'll go ahead and come around the left side, and you'll see how far back the LabRadar is respect to, or how far back the rifle is respect to the LabRadar. As far as the muzzle is about 2 inches. Rifle's unloaded, bolts open, so I'm going to go forward to the line, and you'll see as far as the LabRadar is concerned, again from the front, the offset of the LabRadar with respect to the rifle about 3 inches. So you have to be careful when you're shooting in this manner so you don't shoot the LabRadar. Rimfire, it's not too difficult to control the muzzle and difficult to control the rifle between shots. But again, like I said, make sure you're on a stable rest and it doesn't move around while you're shooting. Once you've actually physically set up the LabRadar with respect to your rifle, you'll want to go ahead and adjust the settings on the unit itself so that it can actually pick up the rimfire rounds. First thing to do is to actually adjust the velocity range, and you'll move it from rifle or whatever you are on. Make sure you put it to handgun. Yes, handgun is what I use because the way this whole thing works is that handgun and rifle are two different ranges within, or specific ranges as far as the minimum and maximum it can detect. And apparently handgun allows it to pick up rimfire better, because rimfire is generally not going to exceed the upper limits of the handgun setting. The second one is to, well, I don't really look at this, but I'm always set at 6 inches on the projectile offset. As far as the actual trigger level, I make sure I'm set to the highest, so I go to 1. Trigger source, always going to be trigger, and that's kind of it. I mean, I really don't do anything else, and that's how I get the rimfire rounds to detect with the LabRadar. Hopefully this helps, and if it doesn't work for you, all I can recommend outside of that is to just get the external microphone, but this seems to work for me.